Oh, Kim, are you actually on, or do you still need me to
Here,
run the meeting?
but I'm here. Jury duty starts again tomorrow. It's up to you. I haven't looked at the agenda. If you wanna just run through it, that would be cool.
Sure. Give me a second. Let me pull up the agenda myself. And let me also make sure I post thing here. So for folks, feel free to put your attendance in there. So I'm looking at the agenda. The only thing on the agenda for today, actually, I realized is Brendan Lum has something. I think there's a couple other things I'm going to add onto the agenda real quick. I doubt Brendan Lum will be on to demo. I know he just got sick, and so he's not feeling very well. So I don't think he'll be. Actually, this is something. Given that we've been talking about this, we can probably. I can at least talk to some of it. But we'll give it another minute or two for some folks to join, and then we can start.
I'm sorry, who got sick? I'm sorry to hear it.
If you were saying something, I think you were quite low.
Let me try again. I'm very sorry to hear it. Who got sick?
Brendan Lum.
Okay, Brendan.
Yeah, I'm here. I'll try and stick it out and
Oh.
talk about the votes. I'm kind of like drowsy, but I'll try and do the best I can.
Yeah, Brendan, feel free to hand off. I know you and I have been talking about a lot of the same things, so if you need me to talk to any of it, I'm sure I can do that for you.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the post that I've been working on, and then we maybe can talk a bit about the effort set that we are trying to collaborate on.
Tom, I think you should plug your blog post too. I liked it. I read through it yesterday. If you want.
Yes, I'm adding it to the agenda right now. And thank you.
Did we ever get the negative levels announced?
Yeah, we announced YOLO levels from the Chain Guard folks on
Yes, but in this meeting.
April 1st. Oh, I don't think so. I was gonna try to make a joke and hint to it, but I didn't have anything clever enough because we had the meeting like right before April 1st. But yeah, I can put a link for those that missed it and want a little laugh.
Yes, please. It was released April 1 with all that implies. I can't take any credit, but I did have a great laugh. So yes, we should definitely, please do throw a link in. I think some people here would particularly enjoy it.
All right, well, we can get started. All right. Actually, I don't remember, Kim. How do you usually introduce it? Do you ask for folks? Anybody new has joined?
Yeah, yeah, if we want. Usually, if the agenda is light, I try to just see if new folks want to say hi.
Yeah. Anybody new to the group who wants to introduce themselves?
I'm newish. I'm Isaac. I joined Google last month. I'm working with Brandon and Michael Windsor and others you've probably seen before.
I'm also new. I'm Simon Kent. I also joined the team last month, although I've been with Google for quite a while. I will be working with Isaac and co. So great to meet you all.
I'll jump in. Altez here from Security Compass. Haven't been in the SLSA group specifically, but have been involved with a number of other groups. I'm looking forward to collaborating with folks here.
Yeah, hello, Pavel Pawlak from F5. Starting to looking around and checking if I could collaborate. and provide some inputs value.
Hi, this is Parth. I've been to some of these meetings, and other ones, other open source meetings, but basically been applying a lot of the SLSA into Tecton and a lot of other tools out there. So glad to be here.
This is Hector from VMware. I have been in other parallel meetings of Cloud Native Foundation. And generally, I sync with Joshua, so he's coming to this meeting and then I get the information, but he's sick. Well, and PTO, so I come in this time. Thanks to see everyone.
Hi, this is Naveen. I contribute to other open source security foundation projects and yeah, to contribute more here. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Melba. I'm newish. I work for IBM dealing with supply chain security. And so I'm relatively new to SLSA and trying to understand how we adopt this for our own processes.
All right, cool. A lot of new folks. Glad to see it. Brendan, do you want to take it?
Yeah, I can start. So I wanted to share a little bit about some things that I've been investigating and talk a little bit about a blog post I've been working on, and maybe share it with a couple of folks. It's still like kind of half-baked. Just a little bit of background. Recently, I've been diving into SBOM quite a lot, especially for SPDX. The goal of what I'm doing is trying to see whether there's any overlaps and synergies with SBOM and SLSA. And hopefully kind of document a little bit of how the two relate, and maybe we can seek out some synergies that we can collaborate on. So as part of this, maybe I'll share my screen. Go. So this is like, as you can see, this document is still being edited heavily, but I can probably share it with a couple of folks. But basically, the point of this document is to kind of talk a little bit about how SLSA and SBOM are kind of usually seen as two totally different concepts or two different areas. One on supply chain security, one on vulnerability management, but they kind of have some synergies. It talks a little bit about certain overlaps in terms of what we've seen in SBOM, starting to kind of take into consideration about built metadata, which is essential to create a complete SBOM. So we talk about how good built provenance and good built metadata is essential for SBOMs as well. And then we talk a little bit about some of the requirements, such as like authenticity / provenance and distribution of SBOM documents, what we see as well with SLSA. And then we talk a little bit about integration points and the difficulty of like being able to adopt this across the ecosystem. And both SBOM and SLSA do have that difficulty in terms of needing to implement this across many different tools. So yeah, that's kind of just like exploring synergies. We kind of try and throw out some ideas of what we can do. One is, maybe we can take some of the SLSA concepts and also integrate them into SBOM. We recently started SPDX build profile groups where we're talking about this. The idea that is maybe we can take some of the SLSA provenance fields and include them in the SPDX definition, potentially also being able to make references to SLSA provenance documents from the SBOM documents as well. And I think that we are that we kind of throw out there. So maybe because there is overlap and the functional requirements, we can work on similar solutioning for storage and distribution, or for provenance we can just use in total as well. kind of just to scope down the problem space, since these two documents are kind of used in a similar context. And so the idea that, you know, maybe Salsa, if we focus our efforts on making the Salsa tooling, we could use the Salsa metadata and maybe augment it a little bit to be able to better generate SBOMs. So instead of, you know, implementing Salsa SBOM for every tool, and this is something I spoke with Mark on Monday, maybe, you know, Salsa can be augmented with a little bit more metadata that it can be used to generate SBOM information. So we can focus efforts on just integrating Salsa into the build tools. Yeah, and the conclusion is just kind of like, you know, this is something that's still pretty early on, just more talking about ideas, and the call to action is like get folks to come to this group or the SPDX build profile working group. Yeah, so that is pretty much the blog post. I think wanted to kind of give a heads up on you know what are some of the ideas that I've been looking at and we've been talking about, and to get some feedback as well. I think we are looking to publish this blog post in the next couple of weeks. Yeah.
Are you planning to post this under the Salsa blog post or somewhere else?
That's not decided yet. Yeah, we're to figure it. It would either be in the Google blog post or the Salsa one.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're gonna leave that to our tech writer's discretion there.
Yeah, I don't know how to deal with things that aren't requirements but are encouraged. I mean, if Salsa doesn't include a requirement to generate an SBOM, at least I don't think it does. I mean, it's a good idea to do. So, I mean, it's okay if it doesn't include that requirement, but we certainly want them to be able to be worked to get used together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, I think in the SPDX we're talking about making references to Salsa documents, so you can kind of like, given the SBOM, you can look at the Salsa provenance and be able to make policies and stuff like that. And maybe Michael can talk a little bit more about this. We started working together with Santiago as well, to start talking about maybe some kind of more analysis and kind of like mapping these things together. And Michael, feel free to chime in on that.
Yeah. Yeah, we briefly started talking about some of that just around like, hey, now that we have all these great salsa attestations, how do I go and ask questions of my supply chain? I think is sort of the thing we're trying to start to figure out. And in a way where, you know, given all the challenges of stuff like, you know, I might have access to all the open source stuff, but there could also be vendor information where a vendor might only be giving me some information, but not everything. And how do, you know, what sorts of things can we do there? And there's also a thing of from like, my project might trust these things, but not those things. And how do I kind of, you know what how can I trust different, both different data sources as well as different identities in generating the salsa stuff? And I think it's interesting. It's an interesting challenge there.
Speak up. I really like the direction, Brandon, you guys are kind of going with that. Kind of like David was saying, you know, it's not a requirement of Salsa. However, that makes it really attractive for me to think about, you know, having the interoperability together with these two things that, you know, we probably should be doing. So I'm really keen to see this, you know, as a proposition. This is great.
Okay, I added some text in our notes. If it's wrong, please correct me.
Yeah. So I think that's true, and I think there's also a second piece of it, which is I think the SBOM is one really big important piece, but I think over time we'll start to see the same thing beyond SBOM, right? Like how can we just sort of link SLSA attestations with all sorts of additional supply chain metadata? Because like, for example, I know there's a lot of great work coming out of like scorecard and I'm blanking on the name of the new one where I can self-identify the governance of my project. And it would be useful to start to see like, hey, I trust projects that do these things, but not those things.
I don't know if this is the time to bring it up, but one of the challenges that we're seeing is this idea of the sort of the false positives in all of this. It could be very disruptive across supply chain. And if there's anything we can do to help reduce some of that noise would be quite helpful. So we've spoken to the folks at SPDX and now in SLSA as well. Anything that could just help. And again, it's a common problem across many different domains, threat modeling, so on and so forth, but even code scanning. But if there's a way that we can bring that down a little bit, maybe push it as early as possible to the point of attestation and look for certain variables or factors that we think are necessary, something along those lines, I think would be helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, Altas, maybe we should sync up as well. I'm kind of curious to hear what your thoughts are, since you've also kind of like been looking at the area as well.
No problem.
Eric, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so I think this was just mentioned kind of very briefly a second ago, but one of the approaches that we're starting to look at, and I see a lot of common faces in here from some of the other working groups in OpenSSF, but some of the things I mentioned in the best practices group, as well as the tooling group, is really starting to look at, as we build out, not only picking tools, but really starting to think about best practices and frameworks for that. Is the question really, should a standard for best practices be the incorporation of the SLSA framework as a key differentiator for assuring that your SDLC process is fully as secure as it can be? I mean, certainly there are other processes and things that you can incorporate, but it starts to provide that that focus, especially since a lot of people have come out with some key metrics and discussions on just how few developers are actually trained in the context of security. Having a framework like this and helping developers to adopt a better posture from the beginning allows for a more secure application, not just infrastructure. So internally, we're starting to build some things that will incorporate the community a little more on as we progress. But we're definitely taking SLSA to heart and using that as a step-by-step gauge for where our solutions and our internal development will be, what our posture is. So I think it's something we really should be working with OpenSSF groups to make a standard rather than just a framework that can be adopted. That's my opinion.
Yeah. Real quick, just on that note, I know that some of the partner groups in the Linux Foundation have written some like best practices guides and have started building some sort of standards around this. I linked one of the ones from the CNCF supply chain security best practices guide in there. But I agree. But I agree with you there that we should be building out some actual practices.
Yeah, I supplied that link to the best practices group in the meeting the other day. So yeah, I agree with you 100%.
David, you're up next.
Yep. So I wanted to respond real quick to the countering the false information and false positives and attestations. Obviously, that's a real issue. I think part of a solution is not just recording, what the claim is, but attributing where you got that. that doesn't solve the problem completely, but at least lets you answer, not just what the data is, but why should I believe that, and maybe discounting things that you think are dubious.
I think that's a really good variable there, David. There's other stuff as well, like
Sure.
automating some of this as well, like some of the tooling can provide additional factors that say, hey, we've tried this in a number of different ways and came up with the same results, but it's all good. Great thought.
Cool. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? Brendan, anything else on this?
No, I think it's good. And if anyone wants to kind of just browse the blog post, just send me a message and I can share it.
Cool. And feel better.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna go pass out right now. So.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Tom, you're up. You're up next.
All right. Thanks. Yeah. So I just wanted to draw folks' attention to this series of blog posts on how to salsa. The first two have been published. I expect that like part 3 should go up sometime very soon. Basically, I put this together because the salsa website and like requirements are like very specific about how a build should be conducted and like what the requirements are to be met, but there wasn't very much information about like, okay, now that I've done that, how can all of this fit together? And so this series is basically a collection of thoughts on how those things can be done, who can and should do what, when, and yeah, if folks are interested and want to take a look and provide feedback in whatever forum you choose, I think that would be really helpful. And there's no I'm under no illusions that the solutions that I propose here are the best solutions. They're just sort of examples that we can use to build off of.
Sean, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'd just like to say I found them both very useful because they explained a lot of things that explained approaches to providing attestations for a lot of things that it was dubious to me as to how to do. And it's given me some guidelines on how we can start providing attestations for things for which there are no attestations upstream. And I think that's been a very useful part of it for me. And just seeing how all the pieces fit together, yeah, has also been extremely useful. So thank you, Tom.
Yeah, same here. I think it also highlights a lot of things that, like, even though there's not a lot of at least external tooling for some of the things around how I might be using policy around some of this, I think it gives a lot of good ideas on what to do, where we can start looking at next steps from a tooling perspective.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Cool. So I'm going to go quickly talk about two small things quick and then go to the I think the slightly bigger one. So I also wrote a blog under the official Salsa blog called Salsa's No Free Lunch. I'll link that here as well in the thing. So yeah, this is more or less just trying to kind of clear up some confusion regarding salsa, given that obviously some folks who are just relatively new to salsa, they're kind of confusing best practices with what salsa is actually sort of providing. love to get some additional feedback on there. I know that has actually opened up some interesting potential inconsistencies in the SLSA spec itself. So which we're going to address, but yeah, love to also get some feedback on that as well. Another quick announcement. So SSF, which is some of the stuff I know I've demoed in the past, that was some code contributed by City to the Open SSF. We now have community meetings starting next Wednesday, or not next Wednesday, starting this upcoming Wednesday. The notes are in the all the information's in the notes. It's on the official calendar. It's on Wednesday at 10 a.m. Looking to sort of start addressing some of these things in a real way, where as a community we can sort of, you know, start to build out some of the stuff that's coming out of SLSA from some of the other things from the other Open SSF groups to include in there and use it as sort of like a project that, you know, is dog fooding everything that the Open SSF is doing, to then also show what supply chain security could look like. Okay. Now, the bigger one is, I don't know if I created some issues. There's been a bunch of GitHub issues created, so I don't know if there's one that's been created for these two particular related things. One is that SLSA 2 service generated requirement seems to conflict in ways with SLSA 3 non-falsifiable, as well as based on some of the stuff that some of the folks, you know, Azra and Laurent had demoed previously. There's some concern as to like that they might be hitting the spirit of SLSA 3, but are they actually complying with SLSA 3 because of the way that service generated is defined? And I think it's worthwhile to maybe have a discussion on it. So the first piece regarding SLSA 2 service generated, and let me bring this up and maybe share my screen here. And this one should hopefully be the quicker one. So if I go down to service generated, so service generated defines sort of, it pretty much says, hey, data in the provenance must be obtained from the build service. So that pretty much is sort of saying, hey, the provenance is generated by the actual build service, not the build step. Totally makes sense. The problem there with non-falsifiable, though, is non-falsifiable, at least it's causing some confusion, is the signing key must not be accessible to the environment running the user-defined build steps. Is there ever a case where you would have the service getting generate like the and I might be answering my own question here, but is there ever a case where your service would be generating provenance, but then would be signed by a build step? Or is this just literally saying, hey, if you do have a signing key, make sure that that signing key is never accessible to the build step? Jacques is first.
It feels like a sanity preserving measure, or just a sort of a thing that you shouldn't have to mention, but it has to be mentioned for completeness, which is to say that the build should not be able to verify itself. It should be an agent outside of the build that verifies it or speaks for it. Is that answering your question, or am I just restating what you already said?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think it's just trying to make sure, you know, because when I read through it, I'm just like, oh, okay, cool. The service is now generating all my provenance. And then the next thing around non-falsifiable is sort of saying, hey, well, given that my stuff is already being generated by the service, do I need to say that the thing is only not accessible to the build steps?
I think it's worth saying for completeness. It's a fairly potent key if it can attest to, so to speak, anything that comes from a build or anything within the scope of building. That's a pretty hefty sort of permission to expose to a build environment, would be my thinking. I'm going to drop my hand though, because I see a queue forming quickly.
Yep. Tom?
Yeah, so I think there are maybe two things going on here. one, I think when we were initially drafting these requirements, if I recall correctly, what we were thinking was that at level 1, people might just be handcrafting their level 1 provenance, like just like opening up a text editor and like typing in the answer. And we said, like, at level 1, that's fine. Just give us the data. We're sort of establishing the pipeline, whatever. And then we sort of wanted to like tighten that up as we went. And I feel like I remember that the intention was that at level 2, that the data in the provenance, that it might be fine if the build step actually created it itself. And so I wonder if at level 2, like if sort of if somehow through some of the rewordings we had wound up with multiple different definitions for service generated, where what we really meant is like, hey, that like automated system that you used to perform your build, it should be creating the provenance now instead of it being created manually. And then what we wanted to, and we also recognized that at level 2, people might not have done like all of the work necessary to really lock down their build, like their build environment. And so there might not be much of a separation at all between the build step and the service. But that what we wanted to see at level 3 for non-falsifiable is that separation does become much more clear, and that includes protecting that key from the build step.
Cool. Yep, I think that makes sense. Sean?
Well, I mean, when I looked at this, I thought it was just kind of a codification of something that we've understood for a while, is that we always treat build code as hostile. And so,
yep.
I mean, this makes sense in that context, and I don't know that it makes much sense if you actually trust the build step. But yeah, we've always treated build steps as hostile code, and so we've always assumed that it would be, and I think I've seen this in some of the diagrams that you presented before, Michael, is it's the orchestration part that actually does the provenance signing. And so that's doing an inspection of the build step, but it's not actually running the build step. And so the build step itself doesn't need access to any of this material.
Yeah, and I think that thing you just said is going to be very important in the next little topic we'll be talking about. David?
I think I think many of the other people said similar things, but I guess my thinking is, the signing key, the point of this signing key is trying to minimize the privileges of the build service, and therefore by not providing it to the build service, it's a separate thing. Of course, you're signing something that was actually generated by someone else, so you're not getting maybe a huge bang for a buck, but you're getting something for this.
Cool. Yeah. Sam.
Yeah, so just to add on to what's being said here, I know, so I work at GitLab, and we were somewhat confused by the definition of service generated. And what I'm hearing from Tom and others is that really the intention was that this was more of a scripted generation thing, rather than, like you said, somebody just opening up a text editor. And our confusion was on the definition of that, whether it could be done by a script at all, or the other way of interpreting that definition of service generated as it's written up now is that the actual GitLab runner itself, or if you're using GitHub, like the actual GitHub actions, like the underlying control plane itself would have to be the thing generating that. And so, that seems extremely strict for SLSA level 2. It certainly would be very secure to have that come directly from the underlying control plane itself, but it did seem overly strict. But it sounds like maybe it's just a terminology or a definition misunderstanding, and maybe, rather than consolidating these, perhaps we just need to clarify that service generated, or maybe even rename it something like script generated or, scripted generation, however we want to phrase that, but to make it clear that, this is happening in a more automated fashion at level 2, and then there's increased security at level 3, and then, perhaps even more increase in security at level 4.
Yep. 100% agree with you on that one. And I think that literally opens it up to the next little piece of that same topic, which is, yeah, what counts as service generated? And so I just created a GitHub issue because I didn't see one specifically around that. And I think some of this had come out of Laurent and Azra's demo, which is, hey, they're not getting the provenance necessarily directly out of GitHub. They have a reusable workflow, which you can't, like, the end user can't change that. Like, they don't have the ability to modify what's actually happening in that step. And so does that count as service generated? By the way we have it worded here, probably not. But is it still safer than the other option, which is, yeah, I have a build step that has that has developer code running in it. And yeah, on that case, I definitely do not want that build step to be generating its own provenance because it can fake it quite easily. But if I have something that has been pre-approved, has gone through its own sorts of stuff, I probably trust it significantly more than that, but maybe not quite as much as a full-blown sort of trusted control plane that has been built with that specifically in mind. That's just my 2 cents, but wanted to kind of open up. Tom?
Yeah, so just to be sure that I understand, like I think with that reading, what you're saying is that perhaps the only thing that would actually be acceptable is if, like, in the case of this GitHub Actions workflow, if like GitHub itself as a built-in feature was what was producing this information. Is that correct?
That is my reading, and I think other folks as well, like GitLab, and I think a few other people have sort of said the same thing. Like if I look at a tool real quick, like if I look at a tool like Tecton and Tecton Chains, the way that Tecton Chains is generating the provenance is Tecton Chains is, reading through the logs, it's validating the identities and so on and so forth, which itself could also maybe not be considered service generated depending on how you look at it. But I think the thing there is, like, it's a separate service that, I think the big thing that we're trying to say is, like, limiting the state space, right, of what could potentially be happening in there. It's only looking at the output and then doing some stuff to it, compared to, hey, here is another build step, and that build step, how did it get in there? And yeah, like, I think there's some confusion as to that.
I see. Yeah, I think that what we really want with this is, like, in the end, do we care if it is service generated per se? Probably not. What we care about is that we can trust the contents, right?
Yes.
And so, like, probably anything that gives us a high degree of trust in the contents is probably fine. And maybe it just comes down to how that's encoded in the requirements. I think I saw that Astra also had her hand up. So.
Yeah, I think plus one of what Tom just said about how we're trying to trust that the contents of the provenance is actually non-falsifiable and not tamperable by the build process and by the maintainer. And so the original point that I was trying to make when raising my hand, though, is that the reusable workflow itself is the service here. So, like, for strawman's sake, let's suppose that we wanted GitHub and GitLab, these people to only be the people that provided provenance. In those cases, it's very difficult to define a generic and also usable and practical provenance statement that would apply to every ecosystem's type of build. Like, I don't think that's what we want. You could only pretty much get, like, basic GitHub context information. At that point, you can't really, extract away information that you might care about in a specific ecosystem. So I think it seems a little bit too much to expect that GitHub or GitLab or other CI/CD systems are the ones producing this provenance, but more so that you can build provenance that is trusted and isolated away from influence. You know, for example, enterprises and whatever can define their own reusable workflow. So I think really here the reusable workflow is the service.
Yep. Agreed. I think the just looking at what Tom posted in chat there, I think I would even maybe take it a little step further from not just automated, but you know, to what Sean was talking about. Like at the end of the day, we want to make sure that whatever is generating the provenance is not, a developer does not have the ability to modify how that works without going through some sort of, you know, normal approval process. But Aaron?
Yeah, I like this conversation a lot because I'm trying to think about, you know, I guess my quick question is, does anyone think they're at that third level today, right? I'm curious if anyone could argue that, right? Almost seems like it's the way we're talking about it, you almost need a third party like GitLab or GitHub to, you know, be that, you know, that a tester itself, separate, like you're saying. But what about like, what if, you know, me as an enterprise, you know, security person, like could create some sort of job that the developers couldn't dabble with, and then we insert that as that piece. Like, I wonder if that's good enough. And I guess that's what I'd be looking for.
Yep. Laurette?
Yes, sorry. So yeah, I think I wanted to echo what Astra said. I think the reusable workflow is basically a service that GitHub offers, specifically to be isolated from the rest of the pipeline. And I think you could view the reusable workflow a little bit like your control plane. So the reusable workflow uses multiple VMs, the same way that Tekton uses multiple tasks, I think they're called. So I think that would be the analogy. Yeah. So yeah, I guess it depends what service means, but I think a reusable workflow is really a service provided by GitHub.
Yep. Yeah, makes sense to me, and I think we just need to maybe make that a little clearer in the requirements, and just because it was talked about before. So Tom had said, I wonder if we just relax service generated to automated and then keep non-falsifiable as it would be, you know, as would be fine. And then that thing there was maybe we just want to make sure that we include in there that, you know, the developer does not get to sort of change that as part of their actual what they're running in their build, to make sure that it's like, hey, that's a that would count as the service and would need to go through its own set of obviously CI/CD or whatever to deploy that sort of thing out. And then for the Tekton thing, the only thing I just wanted to just add in there a little bit is at least the way that Tekton chains sort of is set up is that Tekton chains is sort of like recording what Tekton is doing as it's happening. And so that's kind of a, like, it is slightly different than some of the reusable workflows, but I do agree that you still run into a lot of the same issues. But I think, once again, I think it's more of a, I don't know if it actually matters, to be clear.
So actually, Michael, when you say that Tekton can record what happened, like how do you record? Does the task output something to say this is what happened, or do you? So that's what it does.
Yeah. So it records to be clear, it just records the logs essentially.
Right, because like reusable workflow can do something similar. So each VM can actually output some data, but that's not entirely, like, you can't really trust it, because the trust, like, sorry, the build step can really output anything they want. So we could record it, but we try not to. Or at least we could record it, but the provenance, like, you might read it, but actually you would maybe, you know, it wouldn't be as trusted as the rest of the provenance information, I guess.
Yep. David?
Yeah, the more I read this, the more I'm thinking this needs a rewrite. Whoops, we stopped sharing.
Oh, sorry. Let me. Sorry.
I was staring at the thing you just stopped sharing. But you know, I guess originally I had the theory that, hey, what we're just trying to do is keep the signing key out of the build system, which made sense. But the more I look at it, you know, this was commented earlier, you know, if the build system generates X, you know, I don't know how we make it not falsifiable to make it not X. I mean, we can try to protect the build system, but some of this seems a little harsh in a lot of situations, and frankly, I'm not sure how you accomplish it. Keeping the key of the build environment for, say, signing for a release, yeah, absolutely, that makes sense. But that's a different statement than what seems to be made here.
At some point in the future, I think we should have Parth and maybe Brendan demo some of how they're doing some of this with the Spiffy Spire end to sort of maybe provide some of those additional guarantees. But yeah, Sean?
Yeah, just talking about this discussion about recording what actually happens. I wonder how it meshes with the reproducibility requirement further up, or further on rather, as to whether, are you recording enough information? Can you record enough information at the level that you generate the provenance? If the provenance isn't actually part of the build step, can you capture enough information to actually produce something which a third party could then reproduce? If you're actually doing it in the build step, then you've got, okay, I will record all the commands that I'm doing. And the way that we do that is we have a virtualization saddle, a virtual environment sat on top of the execution engine for the build step that actually inspects everything that build step does. And so we record all the commands that we do that. But that's actually kind of in the same container as the build step. And I wonder whether an orchestration engine could actually record the level of detail required to produce a reproducible build if it sits one level up there. I guess what I'm saying is, does it actually make it more difficult to create both a reproducible and a non-falsifiable build?
Yeah, so I think on that note, I think we are okay with saying I think, and maybe we just need to make sure that that's clear as well, is making sure that it's clear that when we say reproducible, we're saying reproducible, the subject of the SLSA attestation is reproducible, not necessarily the actual output of the attestation, because you could be running those reproducible builds on two different machines, running slightly different things to sort of prove the reproducibility. But yeah, Jacques?
I promise that the choice of t-shirt today was purely incidental. I'm wearing my Concourse t-shirt. Those of you who know me know that I am a one-eyed, raging, crazy, swivel-eyed Concourse fan. There's a sort of like a pair of concepts in Concourse I really wish people would steal, which is the concept of resources and resource versions. So the information about what gets inputted into a build is captured by the platform. And stuff that comes out is captured by the platform, because everything that goes into a build or comes out of a build has to be defined as a resource. And every resource has to define a concept of versions, and that concept of versions has to be ordered in the domain of interest. I've used that fact to create quite sophisticated data in the past. I've scraped hundreds of thousands of builds. I've built complete graphs of how things move through multiple pipelines across multiple teams. If other systems would please steal this, I really wish it was more widespread. I think that a lot of these problems would be made greatly simpler. This here endeth the sermon.
I think I agree with you on a lot of those points there. But David, you've had your...
Yeah, I put my hand back up for two things. First of all, simply recording all the commands doesn't necessarily make a reproducible build. As soon as you have parallel computation in particular, there's no guarantee of ordering. There actually has been some research work where they actually force execution of threads to reproduce as well. That's under my list of, that's amazing you even tried, or you're insane. I'm impressed that it can be done, but I don't think anybody's seriously going to want to do that. It creates hideous overhead that can be resolved in far simpler way, like please sort things occasionally where that matters, and just keep moving on with your life. So coming back to this whole non-falsifiable, I mean, the more I look at, the more complicated this gets, because, how do I figure out what the provenance is in so many situations? Really, you have to figure that out. That's a non-trivial calculation, which has to be done somewhere. And if it's not done in the build system, where the heck do you do it? I'm getting this. I see circularity. I don't see answers. I think there needs to be a rewrite here of some kind. What I read is increasingly not what I thought was meant. Done.
Sorry, Parth.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, like you were saying, Michael was saying that Brandon and I are working on Tecton to get to SLSA level 3, I would say. And in terms of non-falsifiable, like we're using Spiffy Spire. So what's happening in that is each task run that's being created by the controller gets its own SFIT generated by the Spire server, basically. And that's what's being used to sign any kind of results that comes out of it. So any result that comes out of it, it gets a signature, and then it gets verified at the end by the Spire or by the Tecton controller itself, and then later on by the Tecton chains once it's actually done running the pipeline. So each task run gets its own SVIT. Besides that, we also are doing hashing the actual status itself, the task run status. So as it's running, we can make sure that nothing is changing. That's let's say the Tecton controller. Only the Tecton controller can make any changes to the task run itself while it's running, so that no other third party or somebody else could come in and change something as the task run is running. So it checks that continuously, and then the controller SVID would be the one that's doing the signing of the status itself. And again, all this stuff is being verified by chains once everything finishes. Yes, I can show a demo later on if people are interested in coming meetings or something, but that's how Tecton chains, that's how we're approaching Tecton and Tecton chains doing SLSA level 3 non-falsifiable.
Cool. Just a quick check. Azra and Rent, are your hands still up, or did you? Oh, okay. All right, cool. So now I know we took up most of the time here. Sorry about that. I think it's still worthwhile. I posted a GitHub issue in the chat before. I'll post it again in the thing here, just so that if folks are interested in continuing the conversation about some of the stuff, because I think it just will need to. Sounds like the consensus is largely. The way it's worded is kind of vague and super strict, and we should be clearer about what counts as service generated, as well as non-falsifiable, and be a little bit clearer about that, and then potentially also sort of move some of the specifics there, either potentially to a higher SLSA level or just figure something like that out. So next up, I believe is David.
Oh, this is just the course real quick. I think many of you know that one of the challenges we have is a lot of software developers don't know anything about developing secure software. OpenSSF as a course, we're updating it. In fact, it's one of the things I'm trying to get finished today, tomorrow, and the plan is to reference SLSA. Now, SLSA is not at a 1.0, but I think we can still reference it as a, hey, this is work ongoing and you should be aware of it. So trying to at least build basic awareness here. That's all.
All right, cool. So I think that's everything on the agenda. I know we have only about 5 minutes left. Was there anything that anybody wanted to bring up real quick, or any topics that folks wanted to bring up as something to do next week, or anything that announcements or anything like that? Only. Oh, go ahead, Aaron.
This is a slightly silly one. I know Kim mentioned last time about a salsa party at Black Hat. I just got approval to go to Black Hat, so I want to help organize that. Kind of joking, but that'd be fun.
Yeah, I don't know who's. I'm personally not going to be there, but it definitely. Cool. When is Black Hat again? Just so folks know.
So mid-August. Forget the actual day, but
cool. Well, anybody who's here who's going there. The only other thing, right? So I know some of the stuff that we had already discussed before. We're actually going to be trying to build out tooling around some of it for for SSF, the Open SSF project underneath the supply chain integrity working group. And so folks are interested in maybe seeing like, hey, actually, once we start writing the code, how hard is this thing to maybe implement, or how hard is it for us to hit this actual SLSA requirement? Love to have additional thoughts and contribution, that sort of thing. Cool. And if nothing else, can give everybody back a few minutes.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
I had a moment where I felt like I was Nash.